Next speaker is a man who I've come to really get to know and to love and respect over the last 2.5 years of my journey with Family First, and that's our federal chairman, Tom Kenyon. He's going to address us on a topic that's a little bit of a change of gear, but nonetheless important, and I think has moral importance for us as well. And this goes to the economy, the energy debate, cost of living, things which help the ability of young people to found and form families. Tom's a former Labor member of the South Australian Parliament. He served in a number of important roles, including as Minister for Manufacturing, Innovation and Trade. He was Minister for Higher Education and Training, Minister for Science and Government Whip. He's currently the CEO of the Sporting Shooters Association. I know my great late Uncle Will would approve. It's not a commentary on Family First gun policy, although Tom might like to opine on that. But he's a great man and a good friend, and as I say, chairs the Family First board. Would you please welcome Tom Kenyon?
Well, thank you, Lyle, and thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here on a Saturday. Always impressed when people take time out from their lives to come and try and change things and come and try and move our society forward. And so thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. Your Grace, it's great to see you here today. Thank you. Thank you for speaking up. I really as a Catholic, I must say I'm really impressed with you and Archbishop Fisher and the way that you take such a vocal leadership role. Personally, as a Catholic, I would like to see more of that from more of our bishops. But this is not a lecture from me on the Catholic Church, so we'll move on from there. But just please, I really want to convey to you my appreciation for what you're doing. And you know, as a Christian and a Catholic version of a Christian, I would like to. It's so heartening for us, for you to do that, and that spreads across all denominations to see people stand up, and the more people that stand up, the easier it gets. It's hard to be alone. It's so much easier to be together. And when we organised in Adelaide the pro-life march, the Walk for Life. The personal effect on me was to see 3,000 other people walking who believed the same thing and to realise that I wasn't alone anymore. So speaking up, the more people who speak up, makes it easier for everybody. So thank you. Okay, from that to energy. Catholicism to energy. There we go. The title of my talk in my head is, because I haven't got a PowerPoint presentation, I hate PowerPoint. But the title of my presentation is Renewables Don't Make Sense to Me. Right? So every time I try and think it through, and every time I'm not opposed to renewables just because the Greens. It's a good reason to oppose renewables because the Greens like them. But I'm not opposed to renewables just because the Greens like them. I'm opposed to them because I can't understand how they could possibly work. On a grid scale, right? It's easy to see how it might help you, on your house. It's not easy to see how it can power a nation and an industry and an economy. So let's start. Why is energy so important? Because there's two reasons. Firstly, because energy is in everything. Right? Energy matters. Our society is built on electricity and oil. Electricity and oil, which up until now has been coal and oil. With a bit of gas, and the invention of the generation of electricity by burning coal and boiling water absolutely transformed our society. It makes our cities possible. It makes our transport, along with oil, makes our transport networks possible. None of this could happen without electricity. And because it's so embedded in our economy, it means all of our costs over time reflect the cost of electricity. Right, so as the price of electricity goes up, and the price of oil as well, the price of energy, let's just call it energy. As the price of energy goes up, the cost of our society goes up, and all the prices in our economy increase over time, including wages. Right? So because we all need to pay for everything. So the primary driver of, or one of the primary drivers of inflation over time is the cost of energy and the cost of producing energy, distributing energy, and so on and so forth. It's also important because in the current environment, the current debate, where we're talking about carbon dioxide emissions, energy is over 90% of the production of CO2 in our society comes from the burning or the consumption of energy. So oil, coal amounts for about 60% of 40% of our carbon emissions, I beg your pardon. Oil accounts for about 32% of our carbon emissions. And of that, so oil, you're looking at transport, agriculture, a little bit of chemical work in the economy, plastics and so on and so forth. But oil, cars, of that section of oil, the consumption of private transport, so the cars we all drive, is about 6%. The rest is ships, aircraft, heavy vehicles, mining, tractors, that sort of thing. So when a government introduces a ute tax to make your car more expensive, the cars that we all want to drive, 8 of the 10 most bought vehicles in Australia last year were SUVs or utes. Right? So the cars that we want for our families, the cars that we want for our lifestyle, that enable our holidays, our retirement, the cars that we all consume, they want to make more expensive. Right? But by doing that, they will, even if they got to 100% electric, would only reduce our emissions by 6%. So you can see that my frustration at watching government after government work on those things that have the least effect but the most impact on people's lives. And vehicles are one of them. And I say that as a new owner of a ute. My outrage has doubled now because I've got a ute. But really, electricity generation is our biggest single contributor to our CO2 emissions. So it gets the most attention. So that's another reason why energy is so important and why we really need to think about it in a meaningful way. Now, I joined the Labor Party in 1991. Jack Snelling signed me up. We'll hear from Jack later. If you were at the dinner last night, you heard the full story of that. But I won't go into any further detail now. But Jack signed me up in 1991. And you will remember in 1991 was the year that Bob Hawke was still Prime Minister. By the end of the year, Paul Keating was Prime Minister. We'd been through, since 1983 to 1991, we'd been through the most tremendous change in our economy that this country has ever seen. In that we transform you, and you have to think a long way back now, but you're thinking about the floating, these were all radical ideas, right? The floating of our dollar, the floating of our interest rate market, so that over time that was freed up and interest rates could go above a government-induced cap of 13.5%. Mind you, that cap, 13.5%, saved my family's house, but you'll remember the effects going from 13.5 up to 19 and everything else. But that floating interest rate and the freeing up the Reserve Bank to change interest rates, that was one of the reforms. There was banking reforms, there was superannuation, there were so many things that came in, the wage accord, Medicare, all of these things were all tied together in a really radical reshaping our economy that was largely effective and laid the foundation for the last 40, 50 years, the last 40 years, I'd say, of prosperity that we've seen. So I joined the Labor Party at this time. It was a time of very rational political discussion, or comparatively rational political discussion, and I thought that's what politics was, where you looked at the facts and then you argued your case. It turns out that was an aberration. We're back to what politics has always been, which is all about emotion and craziness and politics and populism, right? So, which is a shame for all of us, right? But you can see the effects of that in our energy policy, and we need to return to that spirit of the 80s where there was rational debate based on facts about how things should work. And I just want to go through a few things. These are a few facts that I look at and help me come to, well, don't help me come to any conclusion, right? Because I can't make sense of it. So if we look at coal and energy, primarily used for electricity. So a 1 gigawatt power plant is a big power plant, right? A full-size nuclear power plant produces about 1 gigawatt of electricity. And it does that at full speed. It just rolls it out, and you can vary it up and down and everything else like that. So I decided I would look at the cost, and this is not a scientific or engineering costing, right? So just take these as a back-of-the-envelope calculation, the sort of thing I'm thinking about in my head when I'm asking myself about these. And I'll do this. There's one little background to this that I'll tell you about. When I was in Cabinet in South Australia, we were obviously having these discussions regularly about, the energy transition. Not as regularly as we should have, but we were having them. But at no time did we ever sit down and think to ourselves, ask this question, like, what does a renewable grid look like? Right? Physically, what does it look like? How many generators do we need? How much electricity do we need? How many generators do we need? How many batteries do we need? What transmission lines do we need? What does that grid look like? How much does it cost? How long will it take to build? We never did that study. We never even asked ourselves that question. We just sort of said, renewables are good, and how do we make renewables happen? Right? And I don't think any government in the country has done that study. Right? I've not seen it. So for me, it's hard to get costs, and there's a few studies and things around. So just take these figures that I give you now, take them as a little back-of-the-envelope calculation I've done myself and haven't been able to come to any good conclusions about. So, and that may be a reflection more on me than it is on the information that's out there. But let's go through it. So the cost to build a 1 gigawatt a 1 gigawatt power plant. So if you're using the ARENA, I got some costs from the ARENA study. ARENA is Australian government organisation for renewable energy. They cost solar at about $1.4 billion to build a 1 gigawatt power plant. Wind, for the same, this was from utilitysmarts.com, wind $1.9 billion to build a 1 gigawatt power plant. Right? That's just so you can do the calculation in your own time. A normal wind turbine produces about 2 to 3 megawatts, so you can work out how many wind turbines you need to get to 1,000 megawatts or a gigawatt. Nuclear power plant on the energy. This was from the CSIRO cost, right, for a nuclear power plant, their estimation, and it was mostly, this was their Gen Cost report, and it was based largely, I think it was the Gen Cost report, based largely on Korean figures, I think, so $9.2 billion to build a 1 gigawatt nuclear power plant. And gas, $1.5 billion. So, and that's a ScienceDirect.com number. So just so you've got an idea of where I've got those numbers from. Again, I'm not claiming to be an engineer. I'm not claiming these are, absolute figures, but it just gives you an idea of the information that's available, what these costs are. Now, there's some things you've got to keep in mind. We've got to try as much as possible to compare apples with apples and all of that sort of thing. So for a nuclear or a gas plant, no further spending is required. Right? They'll last about 60 years. We know that because they already have and they already do. They are, some countries are currently, even as we speak, receiving nuclear-generated electricity built from a plant built 50, 60 years ago. Same with gas. Even in this country, there are still generators that are approximately that old. Solar and wind, on the other hand, have some additions that you need to add to them. For nuclear and gas too, you don't need to make any changes to the grid, to our electricity grid. You don't need more transmission lines because we already have them in place and they're adequate. You might need to upgrade little bits and bobs, but it's minor stuff. For solar, you're looking at the lifespan of solar panels where they drop off in efficiency. They'll last longer, but they start to drop off to the point where they stop making economic sense. And that's roughly 20, 25 years. I've gone with 20 because it was an easier calculation. What that means is that for the 60-year lifespan of a nuclear plant, you need to... It's not just you build it once and it lasts 60 years for a solar plant. You need to rebuild it twice. So 3 times in total you need to build it. So if you triple the cost of a solar farm, that's $4.2 billion for a 1 gigawatt plant to last 60 years. So it becomes somewhat comparable with nuclear and gas, or coal for that matter. But I haven't even talked about coal here. For wind, that is about 25 years for a wind plant, maybe a bit longer, but let's say 25 years. That's 2.5 times or 2.4 times. So the cost of a wind plant, 1 gigawatt wind plant that will last 60 years, you need to rebuild it 2.4 times, say 4.6 billion. Again, rough numbers, back of the envelope calculation. But that's not enough, right? So because as we all know, it's so obvious, we all know this, that wind and solar are variable. Solar only works during the day, and it works best when it's a sunny day, right? Not every day is sunny, and not all of our 24-hour a day is sun. We have night. The first thing that happened, separation of light and dark. Geez, I even know a little bit of the Bible. It's not bad for a Catholic, is it? So there you go. Wind, of course, it works when it's windy, which is not all the time. In fact, for months at the start of this year, months, not days, not weeks, not a month, for 3 or 4 months at the start of this year, there was almost no wind. Right? We had these big high-pressure systems sitting over our country, and nowhere was windy. Right? It wasn't just South Australia or Victoria was not windy. It was the whole country was not windy. Right? And wind, for most of that time, was contributing a very low percentage of our generation capacity. Right? So what that means is, and so during the day, let's just say it was contributing 10%. Right? It's 10% of the power that we need. So what that means is 90% of the power needs to come from somewhere else. So, okay, we might say solar. Okay, solar's generating that capacity, but it doesn't work at night, so you need to store it. So which brings us to batteries. Right? Renewables need to store power somehow, or they need a backup fleet. Right? So you either need the thing that Australians will tolerate least when it comes to electricity is a lack of electricity. Right? So, first of all, they want it to be there all the time when they turn on their light switch. Right? Secondly, they want it to be cheap. But firstly, it has to be there. Then they'll yell at you about price. Right? So the reliability issue is the biggest and most important thing that renewables need to solve. And you do that in 2 ways: by distributing your generation around the country, and so that some areas are windy before others are, and vice versa. And so you need distribution of generation. You need overcapacity of generation, because renewables generally operate about 30% of their nameplate capacity, and you need storage. So the cost, and the big question for me, and I do not know the answer, and I'm not sure anyone's even asked it, is how much storage do we need? How long does our storage system need to last so that we always have electricity? Because let's say we had 3 months of very low amounts of wind. Let's say we got through the first month and everything was going okay. It's getting a bit tight, but things are getting worried. By halfway through the second month, we're having blackouts because there's not enough electricity. How do you think that's going to go? Right, so they need to design a system that is reliable all the time. And that gets, at that start, you need more and more and more storage, or you need a reserve fleet in the back, like a gas fleet that can provide 90% of your electricity needs, and you need to be able to turn it on at will. Right? And you need to pay for that as well. So you're paying for 2 sets of generation at the same time, or you're paying for generation plus storage, or a combination of the both, which is probably where they'll end up if they end up going down this renewable line. So a battery costs about 700 million, 0.7 of a billion per hour of storage. Right? I got that. That's the Hornsdale battery in South Australia, the big battery. Elon came and did it for us. It was actually good to be around when he was there. It was a bit of rock star hype. It was fun. However, it cost a lot of money, right? So for about an hour, that battery doesn't produce electricity. It stores and then disperses electricity discharges electricity at about 100 megawatts. So you need, for a 1 gigawatt power plant, you need 10 of them. It's about 0.7 billion per hour of storage, right? So again, very back of the envelope. Once you start comparing between watts and megawatt hours of storage, it gets quite complicated, and you start needing an electrical engineer, which I most definitely am not. Right? So again, this is part of the reason why I find it very difficult to understand renewables, and it gets more and more complicated. But if let's say, we'll cost this out in a sec, but batteries last about 20 years, or they say a battery will last about 20 years. I've never had an iPhone battery last 20 years. I'm lucky to have a battery last in an efficient way. Remember, batteries, as you all know from your phones, the more you charge and discharge them, they become less efficient. So at some point you replace them in your phone. For a lot of us, that's, I don't know how often it is for you, but it's probably about every 2 years for me. I replace the battery on my phone. Now, I don't think the batteries that they use for electricity will be discharged and recharged in that same high, from 0 to 100 in the same way we treat our phones. That's not good for them. And mostly at the moment, batteries are used to stabilise the frequency. So they're not actually used for storage and then discharging back into the grid. They're mostly used to smooth out the supply of electricity to make it comparable to the electricity that we get from coal and gas. But roughly 0.7 billion every hour. You need to change them out 3 times. So every 20 years, you'll need to change out those batteries. So that's 3 times. So that takes you to 2.1 billion per gigawatt for an hour. So if you want, what I'm trying to describe here is if you want 1 gigawatt hour of storage, so 1 hour of storage from a 1 gigawatt plant, you need to spend $0.7 billion on a battery. You'll need to do that 3 times over the life of a 60-year plant. That's $2.1 billion in capital cost, like the cost of actually just building it, not running it, everything else. So that over 60 years, it takes a solar. So if we're looking at the total cost of a 1 gigawatt power station over 60 years. For nuclear, it's still at 7.2 billion where we started. For gas, it's 1.6 billion, and I'll come back to that in a sec, where we started. For solar, we're looking. And I've included this 4 hours of storage, right? Because 1 hour of storage is probably not enough, right? You probably need 4 hours of storage, at least. But I don't even know if that's enough. I don't know what is enough in terms of storage, right? But let's say 4 hours. It's $12.6 billion, right? And $13 billion for wind. Now, at that point, it's easy to see that wind and solar are close to double the cost of a nuclear power plant. Right? Again, capital costs. We're not talking about running or anything else. So gas looks extraordinarily cheap at 1.6 billion, but gas has the biggest fuel cost. Right? You're perpetually buying gas. Gas fluctuates highly a lot. We're tending towards higher gas prices as the international price of gas becomes more prevalent, and so without factoring, like I can't give you a cost of electricity now, right? I'm not trying to give you a cost of electricity. I'm trying to give you a cost of building the grid or building a system, right? And that all I know is that cost needs to be recovered over time, right? And consumers pay. Governments don't actually pay for that. Consumers pay it over time, right? So the costs are not included are fuel and maintenance. I haven't included that. And I haven't included the cost of grid upgrades in that because ARENA, again, the government organisation, estimates about $12.7 billion in grid upgrades that need to be taken care of as well for renewable energy. Those costs are not incurred by gas or nuclear or coal, for that matter, if we kept that. So what I would suggest is a very sensible first step for our country, seeing as we haven't done it yet and we've barreled headlong into it. But we should get in the mining industry and and lots of other industries. They have what's called a FEED, a front-end engineering and design study, and it tries to design what you want in the most efficient way, and then it costs it out. Right? And it's a rigorous study. It uses engineering, actual costs, all of those sorts of things. And we need to say to ourselves, if we're going to change our grid so dramatically, we need to understand what we're changing it to. We need to engineer that out, and we need to cost what it is. And so that's what I propose as the first step before we make any further decisions, is let's work out where we're trying to go, right, before we work out how we get there. Now, again, I'll be very, very surprised if, having done that study and working out how much storage we need and the generation costs that we are going to incur and everything else, I'll be very, very surprised if renewables are in fact the cheapest option. They may be. There's a lot there that I may not understand or don't understand. There's a lot of spots there for me to be wrong, but I don't understand. I can't get my head around the storage question and the reliability question and how much that is going to cost us, and no one seems to be talking about it. So that's it. That's my talk. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So Tom's happy to take... we've just got a couple of minutes before morning tea, but lots of hands going up. We'll only be able to take two, but we'll go to that gentleman just up there, Simon.
Yeah, I've got a big loud voice, bigger, right?
Yeah, we'll give you a mic anyway, because we've got people on the live stream watching.
Sorry. Welcome, live stream. Tom, you've spoken more sense than I've heard in 25 years.
I've never made that much sense in my life. No, it's not true. Yeah. I hope I've made sense.
Yeah. So do you know how much roughly a fees would cost?
No, I'm not. I just don't have the expertise or the capacity to calculate that out. All I know is that your capital cost feeds into your price,
I meant the fees. The scheme, the study.
Sorry, the engineering design.
Yeah.
Like, it would be in the millions, right? Yeah. But to do it properly, and it would take a year or two, I don't know. And it would need some some strategic decisions taken by a government, right? And just an aside on that, it will need to be a government. It cannot be a private sector. It cannot be a private sector decision. Our electricity network was not built by the private sector. And if it had been, anyone who lives in the country would still be using oil lamps, right? Because it's not economic to deliver electricity to the country, right? And so it's not profitable. It would never have been done. It was governments. In fact, in many cases, it was Liberal governments that did it, right? They certainly was in South Australia. I can't remember Victoria. I think it might have been Victoria as well. It was General Sir John Monash, one of the heroes of Australian history who built the State Electricity Commission of Victoria, right? So it would need to be a government, but it would need strategic decisions by government about how much storage they did want, what the grid should look like, all of those sorts of things. So it would need to be done in consultation. But all of these things, I mean, if you look at the GenCost report, they're talking trillions, like trillions of dollars of the cost of the economy. So it's a few million spent, even if it cost 10 million at the start or 100 million, it would be well worth it. Right? And we'd actually make better progress in the long run because we'd know where we're going, what we're going to do, and who's going to be affected and how we can work with them.
One last question before morning tea.
Thank you. When our transition away from coal and gas, the estimates put construction of a nuclear power plant at about 8 years or 6 to 8 years. Do you think, wouldn't you agree that it's best to bite the bullet early with renewables and then to start the transition, we temporarily do renewables and then we involve nuclear a bit later because we don't really have as much time as we used to, say, 20 years ago?
I would say no, right? Because I would say we know any system, a nuclear system or anything else, is going to need. Well, I suppose it could be either or, but any system, a nuclear system will need gas, right? Just for the peaking and fluctuation. A renewable system will need gas. So in that that window, while we work out how long to build nuclear and what we need everything to look like, if we are to move to nuclear and we're going to make that decision, and Australians will be able to make that decision next May, still on incomplete information, by the way, but we'll be able to make it. If we're going to go to nuclear, even if we decided to do that tomorrow, we'll still need some more gas and everything else. So I would use gas to fill that link because we know we're going to need it regardless. Whether we go to renewables or nuclear, I would use that. Time frames around nuclear, opponents will tell you it's 107 years. Advocates will tell you it's 4. Neither are right. It will take a long time to build nuclear plants, but it will be the Canadian experience, the South Korean experience has been you build the same design over and over again, and you get better and quicker and cheaper at it. Right, so that would be the approach, and I think that's what Peter Dutton is thinking. But I am very anti-renewable, right, because they don't make sense to me, and I don't understand why we would incur that cost when there are other options. Even replacing coal with gas is a more rational option than just doing nothing, or it's better just to make forward progress, and so involving more gas that we know we're going to need into the future regardless of the system that we need. I think that would be the way to cover that gap.
Well, Tom, that's been very informative. Have you enjoyed that this morning? Yeah. We're right on morning tea. So Simon's got a gift for you. I know you're Family First, but you're a volunteer. It's not South Australian, but it is Cool Climate ACT. So there you go. Please thank Tom Kenyon, our chairman. Well, it's morning tea time. We've got